You're listening to WP Radio. I'm your host, Terry Doherty, and this is an OIAA podcast. This is part 2 of the Kadey Schultz Me Too podcast that was recorded on April 11th at our elections meeting. Thank you very much and enjoy.
To enhance the learning today, like I didn't name my old firm. I've only worked at 2 firms. So this is being recorded. You don't have to give deets. We don't need names, policy numbers, dates of loss. We just need to understand what the communication was and how it went. Shauna, and then you.
Oh, okay, so some place I guess that I worked, there was a coworker, I guess that was maybe being too friendly in, I guess, their contact with me.
Okay.
Right, so kind of over phoning or messaging throughout the day. And, and kind of things, inappropriate things that they would say. So I decided to the situation. And it was dealt with. I guess not in a bad way, but I mean just with a conversation with HR.
Okay, so you went to HR.
No, I went to my manager.
Okay.
HR.
So did your manager bring you to HR, or did your manager go to HR without you?
My manager went to HR.
Okay. And so really interesting, right? Because it can be a discussion up to your manager and then your manager can take it, or it can be a discussion with your manager and then you and your manager go and have that discussion with HR. Did it result in a positive change?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I believe, the person apologized and didn't realize, perhaps, I guess said they didn't realize it was inappropriate. So.
Okay. And did that person and you continue to work?
Yes.
Okay. And did the behavior change?
Yeah, it stopped, and I'm, was hopeful that it wasn't happening with anybody else. So.
Okay. Well, this is ideal, right? This is what we want for everyone. Unfortunately, doesn't always happen.
And I'm not judging.
Laura's speaking out loud now.
Did you ever say anything to him? And I know that's an uncomfortable conversation to have sometimes. I just want to know, did you?
No.
I'm not judging.
I guess and probably think about it. If it had been years later, then I probably would have. But I think that's sort of the thing. It's kind of depends. When you look back, say 10 years ago.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I knew people that went and said things to HR and it didn't go over well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Women they'd be called the B word, right?
Yes, we're going to talk. That's on another flippy flip.
That's what I want to know.
You've prepped us for the rest of the flip chart. Absolutely. Do you think we've had this conversation before? So, but Shauna, you've raised some really important points. One is life is changing, right? So 10 years ago, going to HR as a woman or as a person complaining about predatory behavior was probably handled differently than it is now. Okay? Do I think that there needs to be a proper investigation? 100%. Do I think that just because someone says something means that someone should be fired or disciplined or anything? No, I don't. I'm a lawyer. I really very much believe in process. I think one of the big risks that we have is with the instantaneousness of, trial without verdict because of social media. I think there needs to be process, but I also know that, as Shauna said, going to HR 10, 20 years ago, you became the troublemaker, the problem child in the department, the complainer, the person who couldn't play nicely in the sandbox, right? Well, you can't play in the sandbox if your underwear is being taken off and you are uncomfortable in the sandbox. I'm trying to give you a really granular understanding of this. Ba-dum-bumch. So really important, which is also an issue from an organizational perspective of has your HR team grown and developed and matured and have more training and expertise? Yeah.
So what happens in a situation where you don't have an HR team to go to? And I had this happen years and years ago. And I did confront my boss at the time about it, which was big. I let it go on for a while. because I didn't have the confidence.
Yeah.
I was new into the company, small firm. And you talk to, eventually you sort of give the signs and the signals that you just don't want anything to do with it. And then finally you have to put your foot down. But the activity didn't change. So there's no higher step than that. And my only choice at that point was to leave.
Yeah.
And it was the best thing that happened, but that decision was sort of taken out of my control. I mean, it was in my control to leave, but I didn't want to have to make that decision.
Well, and this idea of it's in my control to leave is not an acceptable standard, right? Like we all agree, I think, on a few things today, and the idea of someone being harassed in the workplace in whatever form, that their only recourse is to leave. Like I'm just going to say this, and Aunt Bonnie, I'm going to use you as an example because you live in South Porcupine. She lives in South Porcupine. No, she lives in Timmins. It's much bigger than South Porcupine. But if you think about it, think about what it means to give up a really good job because you're being harassed. What happens if you're in a really hard market, right? Or a really small community? So what happens if you have to give up the job for your own health and wellness and safety, right? But it's not like you might have just been able to move to another company. There's still going to be, stress around that and risk around that. But what if you're actually completely thwarted from earning a fair living because the only employer that was in that space in your community is the one that is not going to behave properly with you? And I think, like one of the really cool things about the OIAA is that, this organization represents people throughout Ontario who are in the industry. And so in different communities, there's going to be a different access to movement. So our standard cannot be that, I tried, I communicated about it, and then there's nowhere to go, so I had to leave. And I'm not saying at all that, you kind of started it as a question, and I don't have the answer for you. There's other ways of dealing with it, which may be to go to the Human Rights Commission. There's other ways to deal with it, which may be to write a letter of complaint or find out if other people who have worked at that company historically have had a similar experience and elevate that. I know that all of the insurers that I work with expect my company to have a diversity and inclusiveness protocol, right? And so it might be that you talk to your clients about what is going on. That, Michael's raising his eyebrow and that is super scary, but I'm just putting out a blanket of potential options here. And I'm not just talking about insurance. I'm talking about, in the market, in industry, there's lots of different options. None of them don't put you at risk. That is the problem, right?
Laura's daughter's got a hammer, so.
So we could get the hammer. We could get the hammer, and then at the back, and then Frank, yeah.
All right, give me the framing hammer.
You mentioned about most of this is from the standpoint of the employee. But from the employer's perspective, and this comes up, you mentioned the human rights tribunal or whatever. But if you let somebody go for morality issues or whatever, there's a risk on the other side of being approached or receiving litigation as a result of letting that person go.
Absolutely. So, part of that is being very well documented. Part of it is giving an opportunity for performance improvement, right? If there hasn't been an actual assault, right? There's usually going to be an effort to have performance improvement and documented performance improvement. The organization as an employer should be consulting with its, and I don't do this work, it's not a pitch, with their employment lawyer for guidance about best practices and standards to manage that situation, because certainly if you think that this is not going to resolve and the behavior is going to repeat, or it's actually systemic and is happening with multiple employees who are being targeted by this other aggressive employee, you need to document that and manage it. So the risk is that they're still going to sue you for letting them go, right? If that's what the outcome is. The risk is also that you will lose your own staff who are valued members of the organization if you don't act on it, which again, like, this is not an easy, there is no,
Catch-22 sometimes.
yeah,
Because there's a personal situation that's happened with my company where the person that was let go claimed that he was an alcoholic, and that's how come he was acting this way at different social events. And we're going through that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's a catch-22. If you don't do something, or if you do something, it's kind of a fine line, as you said, wavy line.
Yep, it absolutely is. So, so I think the organization needs to have clear policies and processes. If you look at, I'll give you an example, and I don't know if you guys have a code of conduct. Does the OIAA have a code of conduct? So lawyers, we have this rules of professional conduct, and when I'm teaching these rules with my students, they're always like, but that doesn't tell us what to do. And I'm like, because if the code of conduct has to tell you what to do in every finite little situation, it can't be a code of conduct. It has to be really about principles, right? Big picture thinking that then you reduce to finer thinking depending on the situation. But I agree with you, like the duty to accommodate for someone who suffers from addiction is going to have to be one of the features that's considered about this behavior. I want to ask Frank what he was going to say and then tell you a statistic that'll drop your jaw to the ground.
You're talking about situations that do happen and go to the employer. What about reporting situations that never happened and now this person's in trouble? Do it the opposite.
Say that again.
You accuse me of mishandling me.
Okay.
You go to the employer and say, Frank's been mishandling me, and it's not true. What happens in those situations? So you
Yeah.
be careful.
100%, and that's why, you know, my concern, and Terry's not in the room right now, but my concern is that with social media, and you know, like let's bring it back into the employment context, like Glassdoor, right, where you can write anonymously, but giving details about employers. The idea of us getting to verdict without a process is morally offensive to me. It really is. What I want you to know is that it is very well understood in the data that false complaints are the absolute minuscule minority compared to valid complaints.
It's happened quite often.
Well, I understand how it can happen. I also understand that in some cases there is ambiguity, which is also why I think a skilled investigation is really important. But the data uniformly supports that people do not claim that they have been sexually harassed, let alone assaulted, unless they have been. So there's a small minority that they are false complaints, they are fabricated complaints, but the vast majority have merit to them. So, and this is across the Western world. All of the data supports this. What is perhaps completely shocking is that 3% of sexual assault criminal cases in Canada result in a verdict against the accused. 3%. So what I want you to know is that in our society, in Canada, we do not believe women, it's not only women, but we do not believe women who complain that they have been sexually assaulted. We simply don't. There's nothing else in our court system that is at 3%. Nothing else. And remember that there is no financial gain that comes from a criminal process, right? There's no. Yep. And again, if we had 16 days to keep this conversation going, we could do a whole day on Ghomeshi, and you'd probably be surprised by some of the things that I would point out from a process perspective that contribute to how we might filter that process. But it also is a very true Canadian example that is about power and profile and risk management. So Jean Ghomeshi, the person that he chose eventually was the daughter of a CBC board member, right? So when you think about power and you think about when you were in your job and you didn't have an HR department and nothing is getting done about it, so you have to leave, it should not be acceptable in any of our organizations that a situation only gets dealt with when it's the board member's kid who is affected, right? And she wasn't one of the criminal complainants, victims, but she was the one that escalated this because what did she have? What's the word? Power, right? She had a source of power that other people may not have had in that environment. So Frank, I want you to know, I think that we need to stay off of social media as a way of investigating a complaint. I also think that we need to have very clear processes around how to investigate a complaint. And often that needs to escalate to bringing an external person in to run that investigation so that there's at least an understanding or an expectation of neutrality.
As a justice, when it comes down to sexual acts, I investigate quite a few, and some amaze you. I'd be sitting there and say, there's no way it happened. By the time you finish the investigation, going, it did. A lot of times you say, how could this be possible? And in the end, they confess it didn't happen. Meanwhile, you ruin somebody's reputation too, so
Yeah.
you get both sides of the coin.
Yeah, okay. Anything else about mentoring? Will you take away from this the idea of mentoring? Are you mentoring in a positive way that creates an open and expansive opportunity for discussion around safety in the workplace? And if you're not, is there a way to do that without necessarily having to be overt and saying okay, pizza and me too, right? Every Friday we're gonna have pizza and me too, but no alcohol and definitely no effing, right? I just want you to take it away with you and think about it, even if it's just on your drive home today. Is there someone in your organization who maybe could use some positive exposure? Right? Is there someone in your organization who you see occasionally as stepping a little bit out of line in this area, in the area of inappropriate behavior? Can you lead that person, not in a disciplinary way, but in a conduct leadership way, right? Set the example. And this goes back, Frank, to what you were saying on the previous page. All of us, it's all of our reputation. So let's all lead by example. Reporting. So it gets reported. Let's just design a scenario. A person in an organization says that they were, accosted in the bathroom at the holiday party, right? By a colleague who had been on the dance floor and wouldn't kind of leave them alone on the dance floor. And then they were sexually assaulted by them in the bathroom. They go to who? Who do they go to?
Somebody on the committee or
The social committee?
Yeah, or not even, I guess whoever's on the executive.
Okay, so they go to someone on the executive and they say, this is what happened. What happens next? You are now the person who they have reported to. What do you do? Rue says call the cops. Shauna says, was it you, Shauna?
Oh, investigate, but I guess you're.
Investigate?
Well, my theory is, so I have, I'm not playing the devil's advocate, don't get me wrong, but I always try to see things from very different perspectives and stuff like that. And I've taught my kids the same thing. And I've also, if I was ever sexually assaulted or accosted, I wouldn't even bother with anybody. If there's a crime against me, you go to the people who deal with the crime. I would make a report to the cops. I don't want anybody else to deal with this because maybe it's the jaded
part where I don't think anyone else can really deal with it. But if I was genuinely accosted, physically, sexually, whatever, I would go to the cops. Now, in that caveat, my brother is a cop, so, you know, but like...
Power.
I would go to a cop. I would go to a cop.
Yeah.
I would
Do you
go
know
to
that
the
sisters of
authority.
cops will be dealt with differently?
I would go to a person of authority.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone else has that authority when such a violent crime is committed against anybody, whether you're male, female, child, whatever. Like I've told my kid, okay, so my daughter's going to university. She's more than likely going away to university. She's a tough cookie. But I've told her, I said, Farah, if anything ever happens to you, I said, call the cops. I said, call us, but call the cops.
Okay.
I said, I need you to make sure that if anything happens to you, and I would say the same thing to my son when he goes to university and he's away. I said, if anything ever happens to you, yes, call your parents, but call the cops.
So in the workplace environment, Rue, who would the parents be?
The parents, well, in the workplace environment, it's the employer or
Right.
your management.
So,
Yeah, higher management.
so, and then the other part of this, and again, because I'm not telling you guys anything today, we're having a discussion. So Rue's perspective is that if you believe a crime has been committed against you, you call the cops, okay? I may have dissuaded a few people by giving you the data about the convictions. I may have just a little bit dissuaded you, but Shauna's added to that, which I think you actually put in by call your parents and call the cops. And Shauna's suggestion was to run an investigation, right? I've suggested that sometimes that investigation needs to be done with an external body as opposed to an internal body, right? So there's going to be lots of positions here. There's also lots of options. And I'm never going to suggest to you that the only thing to do is to phone the cops. And I think actually that's an extremely personal decision. I think also that calling the cops, depending on what happened and what your experience was, will also be a very personal decision. But it is something to think about, right? So there are different channels. What happens though, so you're now on the executive, there's been this report to you, you've suggested or asked if they'd like to phone the police. What else are you gonna do? Let's say it's the night of. Okay, this happens the night of. So it's 11:30 at night, everyone's been on the dance floor, I may have had a tambourine. That was photographed at Deerhurst, remember, on the stage with the tambourine? Yeah.
I think I would make sure that the accused doesn't leave.
Ooh, okay, let's talk about this. What are you gonna do? Like go and yeah, and get them down on the ground. And
Keep an eye or have, I don't know, or make sure that hopefully the person who was assaulted actually knows who the person was that assaulted them.
okay.
Because that could be an issue, right? It could have happened, and it could have happened so fast,
Or they don't know the person.
They don't really know.
Yeah.
I know it's an industry, but there's a lot of people there that you might not even know, and you may not know this person who did
Yeah.
it to you.
Yeah. So as a lawyer, I am going to encourage everyone in the room not to try to confine anyone. We know this from our big box store security people. Files, do not take it upon yourself to find the accused and lock them in a closet until the cops come. I am dealing with a file right now where a woman was burgled and she and her cousin got in the car and went out in their town and found the two 17-year-olds who had robbed her. It's one of your company's files. Robbed her. And they taped up these kids to chairs in her living room for 2.5 days. So she went to a criminal trial to defend herself, and she's still making her contents claim for the burglary. I love it, so much fun. Anyway, so I'm gonna challenge you a little bit on thinking it through around maybe not pinning them down on the ground or locking all the doors. But I do think that trying to identify the person is valuable. But I also just want to say, and because we do have to move through this, I also want to say, like, are you okay?
What I was gonna say, I mean, you need to make sure the person's safe, they're
Yeah.
comfortable, find out what they wanna do. I mean, the fact that we're here today and you're speaking to this speaks to the fact that we don't know exactly what to do.
And I'm not helping
We
you
wanna
to
be-
know
we wanna be
exactly
better
what to
at
do.
that.
Yeah,
Yes, you know,
yeah.
we do have a discipline committee, we do
Yeah.
have a senior executive.
Mhm.
We probably figure out best course of action, but depending on the gravity of the situation, these are internal investigation.
And the question, are you okay? Do you need medical attention? What can I do to help you? Like, you don't need to come to verdict at that event, right? That's not the process. So, you know, does this need to be reported? You're obviously gonna have to bring it back to the executive. You've got a duty to your organization. You're also gonna ask questions like, are you coming to me? Are you comfortable with me using your name and sharing this with the executive? We don't have enough time today to worry about if the person is on the executive, who's being complained about. That's a whole other issue. But again, high, low, profile, all of those things, because it does happen. I chirped a lot on LinkedIn and Twitter over the last couple of weeks preparing for today about non-disclosure agreements, and I want to talk about those a little bit. There's a big case right now at the law school that I teach at where there was a sexual predator tenured professor, and he would target women, students, and one of the things that he did, and please understand that this at this point is not sexual assault, it is harassment though. He would find out where those students were going for their summer jobs or their articling jobs. And most often you get your articling job at the end of second year, so you know that you're going to it at the end of third year. So he'd find out where they were going for their jobs, and then he would let those students know that he had a lot of friends at that firm. So, oh, you're going to McCarthy's, oh yeah, I'm really good friends with da-da-da. Oh, you're going to Stegman's, oh yeah, I'm really good friends with da-da-da. So the women would start to understand that he was an influencer in their career path. And then he would show up at a law school keg night, right? Where some of the faculty would show up, some of the sessionals would show up, students would show up. Then he would show up at a house party, where generally faculty and sessionals do not show up at the students' houses where they're having a party. And this would escalate, and by the time he was actually a sexual predator, he had very firmly implanted with these students that they would not have a job to go to, that he had enough control over the relationships of the people who had hired these students for summer jobs or articling jobs, that if they were not compliant with him sexually, that they would not have a job to go to. So see that power, see the escalation, see how at multiple stages that is not sexual assault. It might not even be sexual harassment, but then it goes. So the students went to a professor, a female professor, who was doing a lot of work in the law school about sexual assault. And these students complained to her, and she filed, so there was mentoring, right? And she reported to the administration of the law school. And that very quickly escalates. They do have a process. If any of you guys are doing risk management or adjusting for the universities, you know all about this. And there's a reporting process and an investigation. He got fired. And you're all like, right? You feel, okay, he got fired. Except he disputed his termination. He was a tenured professor, right? That means you got your ticket, you got it forever. And he got fired. So he sued or arbitrated under their association agreement, and it was settled. He was still let go. But part of the settlement was that the university and this professor signed a non-disclosure agreement. What does that do for the students? So we've heard multiple nothings, and we've heard it kicks them in the teeth. My question for you is, so that was at one university. So he was a tenured prof at that university. There's no record of him being a sexual predator. So he just went to another university. So is it kicking those students in the teeth, or is it kicking all the students in the teeth? Okay, so my next question for you is, did that professor in her role within the law school have a duty to those students? Yes. Okay, and did that professor in her employment with the university have a duty to the university? We've talked about reputation, we've talked about economics, we've talked about brand, which I think is a little bit different from reputation, honestly. Did she also have a duty to the school? Okay, in 2018, is the duty to the school more about not causing negative press to the school that they had a sexual predator and dealt with the sexual predator than actually protecting the students and the brand and reputation of the university of, we learned we had a sexual predator, we dealt with the sexual predator fairly, and the sexual predator is no longer with the university.
Penn State all over again.
It is Penn State all over again, but it's in Ontario. So please, high-low. I know we think Penn State and the big budget, right? Well, Windsor Law does not have, I've said it, it's recorded. Am I still being recorded? Okay, it does not have the Penn State budget, but it does have the issue, right? And so the NDA was signed by the university and by the prof. Prof leaves, goes to another university, is contacted and told by people who are in the know that this experience happened at the previous place of employment. So he loses his job there. Like it was about to start and he never launched. He goes to a different jurisdiction, gets another teaching job, right? Gets a call. The professor who had initially reported this gets a call. Can you tell me about this prof? Yes, let go from our university because of this investigation. So he doesn't get the job. Okay, goes to another university. Same thing happens. He is suing the prof. He is suing the prof for defamation. So, and I can tell you in this case, and it's all over the internet, so you can look it up, Dr. Julie McFarlane. In this case, Dr. Julie McFarlane has said, this is immoral. Having an educator, employer, execute a non-disclosure agreement in the context of a sexual harasser or predator who is on faculty is immoral. And this will eventually go to the Supreme Court of Canada, I'm sure. Not necessarily this case, but this issue will. Because it's 2019, people, and if you pass your trash by signing an NDA and having a gag order, you better be sure that you are not exposing future students to abuse by someone who you knew was an abuser. You were going to say something.
Well, what it's boiled down to is society has to decide on what's more important, business interests or human rights and safety.
Yeah.
And the only way that that's going to weigh heavily and be successful is if society in general goes along with the fact that it's moral.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's bring it back to the insurance context, and I'm going to use it in the context of producers. You know, the language of a producer. So like a broker who's like a really high producer and brings in a ton of money into their organization. What do you do now in 2019 when you're the head of an organization and you have this phenomenal big ticket producer who's sexually harassing your team? Well, so it depends on how greedy you are. I'll share with you very blatantly, as any small organization, like I run a small shop, there's 24, 25 of us. You know, if I were to have one of my lead producers have to go, that would have a tremendous ripple effect to the security of my organization. The financial security of my organization. But not having them go would have a tremendous negative impact on the security of my brand, my ability to retain and hire qualified, skilled, amazing employees. And it could also have me lose my relationships within the industry, right? So we know, and this goes back to the HR comment, we know that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, HR would deal with this issue differently. And I think we're also getting to the point where we know that if a producer has tremendous financial value to the organization, Harvey Weinstein, okay, tremendous financial value to the organization, but an investigation, a fair investigation, has concluded that they are a sexual harasser or sexual predator or sexual assailant, that they need to be removed from the organization. This is hard stuff. So I wanted to talk about NDAs, gag orders, immorality. I would like to come back in like 5 years when my daughter is 8'2" and continue having a conversation about it. We've talked about this all through, right? All through. This is not written here as in you, all of you have a duty to always speak up. It is written here so that you will think about if speaking up is what can and should be done, and if not, what are your alternatives? So let's not stop, right? If you think that you cannot speak up for whatever reason, don't stop your internal or external conversation at that. Map it out, decision tree, right? What else can I do? Who can I speak to? Who can I reach out for mentoring? Or who can I reach out to mentor? What's the policy here? How can I investigate this further? Do I need to document this? Do I need to document this to a third party, right? But what I do want to leave here is if we see something that is not right, especially, and I'm going to share this especially with the guys, if you see something that is not right and you're standing right there, you are the influencers in that space. If you turn to your friend or your colleague who is out of line and you say, you're out of line right now, I want you to correct your behavior, this isn't good for any of us. You will be doing everyone in the organization, all of your colleagues, male or female, a tremendous service. So that's my inspirational Kadey quote for the day. The language we choose to use, I think I'm like 3 hours over. It's 3 o'clock. So we're going to wrap up in 5 minutes. Can we wrap in 5 minutes? So when I was studying to prepare for today, I came across all sorts of really fascinating articles about how we used to talk about women who complained of being assaulted or harassed. And of course, it's easy to see the really big cases, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. And the language then was predator, villain, and victim. And until Me Too, I just want you to know, predator, villain were used against the complainant. We saw this with Kavanaugh, with the Kavanaugh hearing. And victim was the poor guy who was being unjustly accused. So I do see a real shift in the language, apart from, the Kavanaugh hearings, where predator and villain are either being removed from the lexicon or are being placed against the perpetrator of the assault or the harassment, and victim or complainant is being used for the person who is reporting the incident or assault. Please remember, like when we've talked about power, remember that Monica Lewinsky, everyone knows Monica Lewinsky. Do you know Monica Lewinsky? Okay. Monica Lewinsky was the predator. That's how she was described. There are tons of printed articles that Monica Lewinsky, a 20-something staffer for the President of the United States, no power there, right? No power there, was the predator, and that she was the villain. So our lexicon is changing. There's a shift happening there, but I also say, like, on this standing up versus stepping out, please evaluate your own language and how you attribute fault through language when you're discussing these really important but challenging issues. Then we have texts and emails. Electronic communications. So, Rue, did you see on Twitter, like maybe 6 months ago, where a woman had posted a text that had been sent to her, where she was a reporter and she had gone out for a drink, like at the end of the day, with someone in her industry. It was like a professional meeting, have a drink, and then he wrote to her by text that night and said, so do you agree with me that the next time we should do this naked? Okay, so let's go to the devil's advocate. He really misunderstood her intentions. No, but let's just give it to him, right? Like let's be generous in our initial analysis. He understood that going to a bar and having a drink, we've already talked about how freaking confusing that is these days. Going to a bar and having a drink was not just professional. It meant that you wanted to spend time with the person and perhaps had an interest outside of a professional discussion, right? She may not have felt that she communicated that or that that was the understanding, but let's just say out of generosity that that was his understanding. Rightfully or wrongly, that was his understanding. So then he sends the text, so, we should do this naked next time. So she posted it with his name onto social media, and Terry has just walked back into the room, so he's missed all of the other stuff that we've said. But she posted it on social media, saying, it might have been 2018, end of 2018. I'd really like to be able to go for a professional drink and not get this as the next communication. About a week later, or 2 weeks later, there was another big wildfire on Twitter about a colleague continuously sending this woman pictures of himself, and like there's no sexual relationship there. They might not have a no effing rule at their company, but he's a colleague, and there was no relationship that supported that kind of sharing. And so I asked my daughter, like, Lily, how would you deal with this? And she's like, you just block them. My 13-year-old, I'm like, do not speak like that. No swear words. But she said, like, Mama, you just block those people. You don't let them harass you online. You block them. The point being, to bring it back to what we do for a living, guys, like, this is danger, 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 right? If people send and feel that sending sexual messages, emails, texts, Snap, whatever, to colleagues or vendor relationships or whatever, like, you must know that from a risk management perspective, that this is liability, liability, liability. So for the OIAA, you know that within the organization, you want to be really mindful, part of your code of conduct. Now, because it's 2019, it might almost be 2020 because I've been talking for so long, needs to include a discussion about electronic communications. But it's also, if it is unsolicited, it should not be sent, right? So talking about sexual activity, sharing parts of your bodies without being asked to, don't do it. We're gonna skip this one because we've already covered this in so many different ways. So what's the value of an apology? And if anyone knows the answer to this, US, really impressive. What's the value of an apology in this? We want to be future oriented, right? Like, the only reason why we're having this conversation is so that we can do better, be better, get better, be more aware, have better discussions, more awareness. So what happens if someone apologizes? What's the value of it?
Hopefully awareness.
Hopefully, so that they're aware. So it's a demonstration of their own growth and awareness. Shauna?
Yeah, just acknowledgement that they've done something wrong. That's, anytime something's happened to you, you want an acknowledgement that what they've done is hurt you.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Gives the power back to the other person.
Okay. It can transfer the power back to the person who was injured. Okay. Anyone else? So I had Frank Gomberg. Have some of you guys mediated with Frank Gomberg? Great mediator. He wrote his master's thesis in conflict resolution about the value of an apology. I'm going to send, Michael, I'm going to send you a clip of the most perfect, incredible apology ever. And if you want to, you can share it around. Real risk if it's a disingenuous apology, right? So about 6 weeks after Alyssa Milano posted #MeToo, I got an email from one of my first ever bosses, I guess, client boss, from the insurance industry. So I was like 25, right? I just started practicing. And it said, and this will be funny because I've told you about my name, if this is the Kadey Schultz who worked at, it's Kadey Schultz. It's like the longest Schultz and a ridiculous version of Kadey, right? There's only one of me on the planet, and the only way he got my Schultz Frost email was by Googling me and seeing my face, and I look the same as I did, right, Aunt Bonnie, as I did when I was 2. I do. I'm taller, but I look the same. So is this the Kadey Schultz who worked at da-da-da? If so, I owe you an apology. If not, please excuse this email. And I was like, you little shit, you do owe me an apology, and it is this Kadey Schultz, and I'm not going to ignore this email. So I wrote back and I said, this is the Kadey Schultz, and what exactly are you writing to apologize about? So he writes back, puts in a little very, very crafted, he knows I'm a lawyer, crafted apology about being completely sexually inappropriate with me. And then he says, and Kadey, I just want you to know that I was very attracted to you, and I thought that you were very smart and that you were going to really do well in your career, and I was just really attracted to you. And so if you want to understand my apology more, I'd be happy to meet you for a coffee.
Oh
Sorry, not sorry. You know the song, Sorry, Not Sorry. Maybe Lily will sing that at Music Heals, right? Sorry, not sorry. But oh my God. So I had a moment, right, of getting the apology and feeling, right? Feeling a little cured, a little improved in the history of my life. And within 16 minutes, because we all pressed send, I realized that the dude was actually trying to pick me up. So what should I have done? If you were Kadey in these boots that were definitely made for walking, what would you do? How would you respond to that email? There's no right or wrong, guys. How do you think you could have responded to that email if you were me?
I think I would have just been, I don't know, I guess as you get older, you look at things in perspective, and I would have just probably said, maybe I would have ignored it or not responded. Or number 2 said, it was a long time ago. Just taking it for what it was worth. I'll accept your apology, but I don't want to hear from you again.
Okay. Anyone else? So I accept your apology. I don't want to hear from you again. Maybe ignore it. Yeah.
I'd say, based on your apology, I don't think you're sincere, and I don't want anything to do with you again. I don't accept your apology. Obviously, you haven't changed.
Okay.
Something along that lines.
Anyone else?
Send them a picture of your family. With a thank you.
With my husband with a hammer.
Thank you for your apology.
Yeah. So I didn't respond. I got some advice from some colleagues. I got some mentoring about what I should do. And I decided that in that context and in my super busy, crazy, crazy life, that I couldn't give him any of me. And so I didn't respond. But I think all of the possible responses are completely valid. Do you think there can be redemption?
For him?
Well, not just for him, but, you know, like Canada is built on a system of values, and our judicial system is built on a fundamental belief that people can be restored. Relationships can be restored. People who have offended our normative behavior standards can redeem themselves, whether through exposure, training, incarceration, whatever it is. So what do you think about redemption in the context of a Me Too incident?
I've seen it firsthand. You take over an office and there's maybe a legacy issue there with some of the behavior that's inappropriate. It's been that way for eons. It's completely accepted by the people in that environment, but it's not right. And it's not going on anymore because of some of this awareness and because people are speaking up. And I've seen firsthand some people that have changed their behavior. And I don't know if it's a redemption, but it's a new chapter. And if we're willing to, move forward, then it's a forward focus.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there will ever be a complete redemption, depending on the gravity of the situation. But a couple of people that I can think of their eyes were completely open. They're maybe an older generation where they didn't think about this kind of stuff.
Or maybe they had addiction issues, or maybe they had...
And now they do. And some of the people in some of the offices are talking to these people, and we talk about it, and they're commending these people on their behavior. In the past, you would have done this, or in the past, or I can't believe how well behaved you're being. So, people deserve another chance. Some people do. But it's a forward-looking thing. The proof's in the pudding, right? I don't think you get out of jail and here's your gold star, you're forgiven and we've forgotten this.
Yeah. I want to have you think about the concept of apology and redemption around what, if you're a leader and you're managing this situation, whether with the assistance of HR or otherwise, this piece is going to be very subjective. And it's important to the morale and your environment and the perception of safety and support, whether by the complainant or by your team, that you can solicit a discussion about how this is understood. So think back to the wheel and the flower. What makes up their lens to process what an apology may mean, and what makes up their lens about the value or potential for redemption? We're on the last pitch, because I'm 3.5 hours over. So I just think the future is bright. I say this a lot. We are better together. We are better for the discussion. We are better for challenging ourselves. We are better for knowing our biases and putting them squarely on the table so that we can have a discussion about it. We are better for our differences. We are not better by all being the same and monolithic in our perspective. And Me Too is an excellent example of diversity of thought and experience and perspective, and how we can still collaborate and work together to make our workplaces, our families, and our communities better, happier, and healthier. So thank you for having me.
All right, everybody, thank you very much for listening to this episode of WP Radio. There'll be more content coming shortly, and thanks again for your time. Don't forget to go to WP Digital and check out our page on YouTube and check all the content we put on for you so far this year. We really appreciate it.